Daniel Gschwind, thank you very much for taking the time to talk to us. Perhaps we could start by, if you could just tell us a bit about yourself and the role of the Queensland Tourism Industry Council.
Thank you, Noel, and it's my pleasure to do this with you and speak to your audience. So the Queensland Tourism Industry Council has been in place for 20 years now. It's a not-for-profit, membership-based organisation. Our members, which is the entire tourism industry, own us and direct us through a board that's elected every year. And our main purpose in life is to advocate on behalf of the industry, speak up for the industry to governments at all levels, but also promote the importance and the value of tourism to the community, so the community understands and embraces the benefits that tourism can bring to a community. And of course we work with our members to support them through training programs, education, events, to bring the industry together, bring cohesion to the industry. The tourism industry around the world is a very complex system of participants in different sectors, different size businesses, and we need to make sure that there is a coherent strategy that can be presented on behalf of the industry.
And Daniel, you've been in QTIC from the start, so you've seen some various issues and problems over the years. The most recent one that we're here and dealing with is COVID-19. Can you run me through how that has affected Queensland? I mean, there were sort of three stages. There was what's happening with uncertainty, then there was health focus and a lockdown in Queensland around the world. And then we're sort of going into the recovery phase now. Perhaps you could take us through how the government, you and the industry have responded.
Tourism is susceptible to multiple crises, of course, and that's true around the world. You know, it can be natural disasters, financial issues, terrorism, all kinds of issues can affect the industry and the travelling public. So we are at the outer edge of susceptibility really to these crises. And in Queensland, for instance, and Australia generally, we have more recently had numerous natural catastrophes, the bushfires, we've had floods, we had droughts, periodically we have cyclones or weather events. So we have a bit of experience in responding and dealing with these crises, and the industry globally, but including here, has always proven to be extremely resilient. We have a very, very strong trend line globally that suggests that the desire to travel is irrepressible. We do suffer and businesses suffer, but we come out of that because the public, the traveling public is in the mood to travel, and more people globally have the financial resources to take advantage of the opportunity. So that's very important to us.
So Daniel, what was it like when you were at the start of this COVID crisis? You don't know what's going on, you're starting to get some emails or messages. What was it like at that time?
Well, it certainly creates an atmosphere of uncertainty. I mean, for us, like for everybody else, it started with the news out of China. China happens to be a very important source market for international tourism for us. So when it became evident that our source market would be affected by the events there through the travel restrictions that were imposed in China, it became clear to us that we needed to prepare ourselves for an impact. China is the largest source of international tourism to Australia at the moment, so clearly we were expecting some problems to arise. When the Australian government made what turned out to be a wise decision very early in the piece to close our borders to China, that had an immediate and fairly drastic impact on many businesses. As the crisis expanded to other countries and eventually all borders were closed into Australia, that meant that we lost the entire international market.
So that was the international market, and then things started to evolve. And for health and safety purposes, the government of Queensland closed its border. So we started to lose the interstate market, the domestic market.
We did, and we also very promptly afterwards lost the intra-state travel, which is 2/3 of the domestic tourism in Queensland. We have a population that supports domestic tourism internally. That was lost too. We were virtually prevented from going anywhere, from staying in commercial accommodation, and that restriction has only recently been lifted. And domestic tourism in Queensland is worth about $18 billion a year. And it is tragically at times like these when everybody realizes that they're in tourism. Even if they never deal with a tourist, never sell anything to a tourist, they're nevertheless connected to this ecosystem of tourism, of a tourism economy. They're suppliers, perhaps in produce, they're farmers, they're laundry services, news agents, petrol stations. They're all involved in the tourism industry, and they realize this when the tourism dollar stops rolling in.
There's the secondary suppliers, the bakery, the petrol station, who are all in that area, and so that stopped for about 2 months?
About 3 months.
3 months.
Yeah, and we're still in the early phases of the recovery. I mean, the Queensland government put together a roadmap. It's something we urged them to do very early in the piece. We said we need a path out of this. It is not only at a human level depressing to not have a future mapped out for you. From a business perspective, it's very difficult to plan if you have no idea of how we're stepping out of this crisis, and there has to be a recovery. We have to come out of it as inevitable. So when the Queensland government eventually put out what they call a roadmap to easing of restrictions, we were pleased to see at least a structured return to business with timelines subject to the health situation evolving in an appropriate way. So we were happy with that.
Who developed that roadmap?
It was a collaboration, ultimately the government's work, but it was on the basis of the input from many stakeholder groups, including, and I have to say importantly, from the tourism industry, because we are an industry based on movement.
That's right.
And movement stopped, so we were very much the front line. So we put to the government what we thought was important, how we could ease ourselves out of it, and the roadmap then spelled out, the distances we were allowed to travel within the state, and other measures, and the number of people who could gather. And thankfully, because the health indicators and the infection rates in Australia generally, but particularly Queensland, were very low. We had flattened the curve everybody talked about, and that then gave the government and its chief health officer the confidence to actually accelerate the easing of restrictions, which we welcomed very much.
Queensland is a big state. There's no flights. There's only sort of self-drive, I suppose. So must be, still things to happen.
Yes, it is a complicated puzzle. Tourism is like a puzzle, and the puzzle was broken apart and in thousands of pieces, literally. We're trying to put this back together again. And flights, as you say, is an important element, especially in a very large state like Queensland, where it's more than 2,000 kilometres from here where we are in Brisbane to the northern parts of Queensland, where some important tourism destinations are. So we need to make sure that there's coordination between the private sector services and infrastructure, such as airline, airports, coach operators, marine operators. We have to coordinate that with the demand side and the regulatory framework. And it was obviously a situation that is unprecedented in terms of the health sector and the health professionals influencing and governing effectively the policy outcomes. And gradually, as the health imperative, the health crisis eases, we have to rebalance the policy input to achieve outcomes that allow our businesses to then, with confidence, put their services back into the market, such as airlines, such as accommodation providers, such as the hospitality sector. That's where we're at the moment, and it is a delicate balance, and it requires a lot of compromise, a lot of innovative thinking. We are in a situation that is, as we've said many times, unprecedented, so it requires unprecedented solutions and innovative solutions.
Talking about the operators, what can they do to become COVID safe?
Well, we have worked with the government and at the instruction, in a sense, of the government to develop a COVID safe plan for tourism and accommodation providers. That is all the experiences, the transport operators, and the accommodation providers now have an opportunity to consider the plan we have drafted with health professionals. It's approved by the Chief Health Officer, so it's formally approved. So businesses who adhere to the opportunities and the options for safe treatment of customers and staff, if businesses follow those instructions, they have greater flexibility in running their business. They may welcome greater numbers to their business, and they have other advantages. So we are very focused on businesses going along with this plan. We also have put in place nationally a checklist which is based on those health measures, and the checklist then that allows businesses to tick off that they've done what they're meant to be doing, and they're then allowed to use a COVID clean business practices logo and mark that they can put on their door, put on their brochure, put on their website to reassure the public. So it's very important for us to openly and subtly reassure the public that it is safe to travel, it is safe to enjoy the services that we offer.
What are the issues that you think the industry or government still needs to resolve going forward? Are there some big issues that you think Queensland still needs to face?
Of course, we have to go back to business opening up, that's true, but we have to respond innovatively to this new set of circumstances we will face. We will see consumers that have different priorities, maybe have a mindset that is slightly adjusted. Consumers, certainly domestically, that are more focused on true value, genuine authenticity, family perhaps, a work-life balance that they may not have thought of before, risk aversity perhaps. So we have to respond to that as an industry and as a destination very creatively, and we have to focus on value. I think value is the key word that comes out of what we're observing with consumers, but also what we ultimately should consider in terms of the economy. You know, it's not numbers, it's not volume of travelers, it's the value that they contribute to the economy, to the environment, to the community, and to themselves. So I think a leading destination in the future will be the one that can most effectively address that, and in the most innovative and comprehensive and coherent way, that they will be the successful destinations.
You've talked a lot about innovation and planning and forward thinking.
It was the travel industry where most people first experienced purchasing services online through airlines and hotels and so on. Uber and the transport disruptions. It was at the tourism edge of things where these things happen. So we're certainly always been involved in innovation. Now I think we're challenged to be more innovative in terms of providing a holistic service to customers that satisfies also their expectations on sustainability. For instance, people want to travel and be left with a feeling that they did actually a good thing, not just for themselves, but also for the place they visited, whether that's culturally or environmentally. And we have to be able to respond to that. And there are operators who do an enormous amount of work, and us collaboratively as well, by changing practices of the management in hotels, the energy use, the water use, the waste production, the reduction of plastic.
I think is a wonderful example. Lady Elliot Island.
Exactly, Lady Elliot is absolutely a leading example of replacing as an island. Obviously they relied on an energy source other than just the mainline power, so they had diesel generators burning enormous amounts of diesel. That's being replaced in total very soon through solar power and solar energy. They do waste management by composting all compostable waste, water management. They have regenerated the trees. So it's a very, very illustrative example of what operators can do. But it can also be a mainland hotel. It can be a big integrated resort that changes its practices on all those things, energy, waste and water, and their social interaction with the community around them to great advantage, not only to themselves, but also to the community.
Thank you very much for your help and generosity. Thank you.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. It's always good to reflect on your own work when somebody asks you questions. It makes you think a little bit more about what you actually are doing and what you're supposed to do or could do. Thank you.
Thanks.